Hey everybody, I'm Sam, thanks so much. Yeah, absolutely love being part of the Academy XI family. There's always so much cool stuff going on, and it's great to be able to contribute to the community as well as see benefit from it. So thanks very much for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. What I'm going to be talking about today is essentially AR, VR, and when we were speaking, I do a lot of speaking on what AR and VR is in the short term and what it means for my students, what it means for my clients, things like that. But I wanted to go a bit further back and talk a little bit about what computing is in general, because AR and VR are really just like display types. And the reason that I'm interested in the space, people didn't get into computers in the 80s because they liked computer monitors. They could predict the impacts of interconnectivity, faster data transfer. So I really want to talk about that importance of computing. So if you plan to get told why computers matter, then lucky you. Then talk a little bit about the tech trends that are driving the need for new types of interfaces, and then I'm going to talk to you about the interfaces that we have today, the technology that's available today, and then from there paint a bit of a picture of some other industries that might get touched as well. So as opposed to just going through a list of industries saying, oh, it'll do this, it'll do that, I want to sort of start from the start and hopefully give you guys an understanding of why I quit my job 5 years ago to invest my time and my energy into this technology, and why I still go home every night and keep learning and doing new things as well. And also give you a bit of an idea of what the current lay of the land is as a professional XR designer and developer. So, firstly, why should you care? So I am an experienced designer specializing in spatial computing at a company called Foria. So we're essentially an immersive technology studio. We do a few things. For example, we are currently doing a digital twin installation for the Art Science Museum in Singapore. I don't know if anyone's seen the big lotus flower. Essentially, digital twin is the heart of our technology, and so once again, AR and VR are just the viewports that you look at this new type of data. So we've created a digital twin of the space, and we've created an immersive digital twin that people can go through and experience different types of content. I can't really talk about the content itself too much until April 6th, when I'll also probably look a lot less tired. I'm flying to Singapore in 2 weeks with hopefully a finished app. Apart from that, we also, last year, we do a lot of AR apps and installations. Last year we created a Lego, like a social Lego multiplayer AR app called Sharebox, which ended up, essentially we got early access to Google's technology, and they said if you can get something built with it, we will demo the app at Google I/O. And we ended up, after like a 1 month sprint, getting demoed next to people like NASA, which was really cool as well. So before that, I worked with a haptics manufacturer in America called Contact Controller Interfaces. My main job and my main passion is developing new types of interfaces with computers. And I see that as an extension of the way that we interact with our own creativity, with the economy, and with each other as well. So I find it really exciting to be able to work at the coalface of human expression and connection. I read I'm going to skip to the end of my section. It's never a good idea. They don't recommend doing that. I read the biography of Steve Jobs, and I was really struck by, it was kind of not one of the main ones. It was more talking about his operational brilliance or his journey from like being someone that was actually not a very good business person to being to making a successful product. And a big thing that it really highlighted was his passion for personal computing, and I think that really gets lost in the phrase. So I start with computers, and computing actually, as a trend, started in the 1700s, and it's what we think of as a computer today is really an automated, accelerated version of the kinds of systems and frameworks that people used through the Enlightenment to understand the dance of the spheres, solve for the first time economic and social problems, chart the entire world, and create essentially the framework for the modern economy. Computers, even up until we were putting people on the moon, it was a job. And it was actually a job that was often done by people that mightn't have had as much opportunity, often people of color and women, and were the backbone of things like the NASA space program, and a lot of the infrastructure of computing and the establishment of computing principles was contributed to by really strong, intelligent women. And I think it's just worth mentioning because it gets left out of the Steve Jobs story. Eventually, though, we created supercomputers, and we created the ability to essentially do what a huge group of people would do in a single box that could run all night, and you just had to shovel coal at the time until we didn't have solar power, which is fine. It's good. The ability to figure out geometry and predict a ship's path in the 1700s, the ability to figure out geometry and figure out ship's path to the moon in the 60s and 70s, it's just been accelerated, and it's incredible. And that was one thing that really stuck with me reading about Steve Jobs' journey in history. Wasn't his, we all hear about the design aspect of Steve Jobs, and he was so brilliant, he did some marketing campaign. He really cared about computers and making them accessible to people. And you think of all the ways that he succeeded and failed and things like that, but when you think about the fact that someone that was so passionate, with Steve Wozniak as well, but he was more of a just love tinkering and making stuff, someone that fought really hard to sort of democratize these powers of computing and make them accessible, that promise has been realized today, where we do have this access to infinite potential, infinite computing power essentially in our pockets, which is really great. The problem is, and I'm not a big complainer, well, for one thing, I'll get into the interface side of it, is that you've got this infinite possibility space, but you're accessing it through a little 2D square. The things that make computing possible, like navigation, interconnectivity, we're constantly connected to each other at all times. We're basically psychic, telekinetic. We can have food summoned to us to our door, all supported by a global supply chain that the orders of complexity, someone even 50 years ago couldn't comprehend, couldn't imagine that we'd be able to compute that amount of data. If you went back to the 1700s to like a scholastic monk and said, "Oh, look how many equations we're able to run," it's incredible, the power of computing, but it's still all through this little box. Not a huge fan of Mark Zuckerberg, but I think what really is illustrated in the past 10, 20 years, though I think that in itself has, like, the excitement has waned and we've sort of had the backlash, is that with this new digital interface and with this new world, you can create platforms, you can create design and essentially computational models and ways to interact with that computer that completely change the world. Whether you love or hate Facebook, it's completely changed what it means to be a human being, basically, at least on a social level. However, computing in general and digital innovation, the sort of like digital wave that's happening, there was a big push, and those productivity benefits are yet to be felt. Essentially, we have seen a big explosion in productivity, and we have seen a massive change in our economy. But just to go back to the 1800s again, the invention of the steam engine and the patents around the steam engine were in the 1700s. Even prolific use of steam engines in the early 1800s, none of that really budged the production levels of the economy that much. It wasn't until like the 1850s, 1860s where we actually saw significant growth in production and productivity. So what I'm getting at there is that we're sort of just at the tip of the J-curve with what it means for digital transformation. And one of the bottlenecks is the way that we interact with our data. So we've also sort of reached a bit of a plateau with what we can do with our current tech space. And anyone's feeling like, oh, it feels like every week there's an electronic juicer, there's some sort of app for dogs to meet other dogs. Actually, that's a great idea. The reality is that the benefits of our current advances in computing have sort of tapered off. The ability to connect with each other, the ability to have the internet, all that kind of stuff, it's all great, but essentially it's diminishing returns at a certain point. This represents the benefit to early adopters compared to the impacts of the technology, and then as more firms get access, the impacts on that technology diminish. So we've hit an inflection point where the things that you've been learning, the things that you were worried that you missed out on in school, like learning how to make websites and stuff like that, there's still a lot of benefits there, there's still a lot of like advances to be made, but it's kind of incremental at this point in terms of personal computing interaction. And this is illustrated by the app that I think is the pinnacle of modern social media, Yo, an app where you send the word Yo to a list of curated friends. So there's only so much we can do with these 2D screens. There's only so much we can do with our current infrastructure with computing. I still love it, but frankly, modern computers, your smartphone, your little 2D square, it can only do so much. It can't really keep up. So, with extended reality, however, which is a term we'll go into in a little bit more detail, all of a sudden, this explodes. It completely changes the way that we interact with data. It opens up a whole new swathe of competencies and disciplines and new types of work and new types of ways to connect with each other that, while some people might worry take us further away from the natural self, I would argue bring us closer to the natural state of interacting with the world and each other, because which we'll go through in a little.